Our final speaker today, and usually I do a pretty good job of scooping things out either through Google or just conversation. Our final speaker is Mark Beattie. He is with Hickey Associates, and he gave me absolutely nothing to give you as an introduction. I was trying to find one little juicy piece of information, but I did grab something that maybe he didn't recognize. He clapped loudly when he found out that we were going to give him bourbon at the end. So he is with Hickey Associates, a global site selection company. Coincidentally, I don't think it's the reason I'm up here. His company is based in Minneapolis, as is U.S. Bank. Mark will give us insights on trends of high-performing regions and cities. Welcoming Mark Beattie. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Welcome to Charlotte. If I had known Hugh McCall was on the agenda, as Ron said, I probably would have politely declined. He's an incredibly hard act to follow, but I've had the privilege of meeting him several times. He's a world-class act. Absolutely wonderful guy. You know, the other day, on Sunday, I was riding with my wife over to Noda on our bikes, and I saw three buses, and my wife said, "Those are your guys. Why don't you go over there and say hi to them?" I said, "I don't want to frighten them. They'll probably decline my talk." But welcome, special welcome to Mayor Fisher and Mayor Gray, as well as Shauna Burton and Linda Bobrowski for the kind invitation to speak to this wonderful group. I am absolutely impressed that you could bring these many folks, and have been doing this for a while, as I understand, in your expeditions to various cities. Benchmarking is a core strength, and you should be applauded for that. I've been asked to talk on trends in economic development and business expansion, what corporations look for when conducting site selection processes, what makes communities successful in retaining and growing their economic community, what communities are hot and why is Charlotte attractive. They also said, positive, upbeat, on inspirational ending as the final speaker of the session. We want people to go away feeling good, so hopefully I'll be able to do that. Let's see. A little bit about Hickey. As Laura mentioned, we're a full-service global site selection public incentives consulting firm, assisting companies in site selection, labor analytics, as well as securing and managing the public incentives. We have been recognized and are partners in many different groups, as listed here. Moving through to the next, just to give you a sense of our founding, 1986, one of the first companies of its kind to offer integrated site location and workforce services. Today, we're proud to be a global leader. We're active in 7 countries, utilizing more than 40 professionals. Our most recent international offices are in Hong Kong and Shanghai, as well as a new office in Sydney. We have 14 offices in the United States. I happen to live here and operate out of Charlotte, and I've been here 6 years, and I'll talk about Charlotte at the end of my comments. But it is, as Ron mentioned, it is a most welcoming place. As a native New Yorker, where I grew up, although I've lived all over the country, I have to say when I joined my golf club here, I was a little bit apprehensive, a little concerned, and then I realized very quickly all the North and South Carolina guys and gals who are there were really focused on giving this guy from Mississippi a hard time. So right away I was in good stead. We're privileged to work with a variety of and a very diverse range of companies. This is a representative, not a complete list. But as you can see in this list, there are a lot of different companies from different places, many of which are global in nature. And with that, it will be a framing of my comments as we go through. I also want to share with you a little bit of my background. Although I was born and raised in New York, my grandfather was born and raised in Hazard, Kentucky. And C.C. Kurt Feltner and his father and his grandfather were also born and raised there. This one picture you can see in the upper left-hand corner, there's a name on there. It says Combs. Combs is a big name in that part of the country. But Feltner is there as well. And so I have been to Lexington, I've been to Louisville, and I've been to Hazard. And I would be remiss, and it was memorial. It's a little tough to see, but this is my grandfather, C.C. Feltner, U.S. Army in Germany in 1919. He's a terrific guy. We lost him in 1972, but a great guy. And he is Kentucky, so there was the comment about my applause and the bourbon. It does go back in the family quite a way, so I'm looking forward to it. Thank you. Well, let's get down to the matter. A good place to start is economic outlook because it frames everything and how people think strategically going forward. There is sustained optimism. You can see in 6 years, if you recall 6 years ago, the academics talked about the Great Recession as being a 7-year workout. And the reason they mentioned that, I think, and if you go back and read the early data, the projection, that was because they viewed it as a global recession. It was going to take time for it to work its way throughout the world, and that is in fact what has happened. And I'm going to talk a lot about global, because if you think about it, if you think locally, if you think globally and act locally, that's very much a core to how to look at economic prosperity going forward. I'm sure you've heard that before. Ron mentioned the global aspect. It's very key. But 6 years in, corporate performance, the last 3 years in particular, has been positive growth, both U.S. and OUS. There's expansion, but with caution. So new product development is key, strategic alliances, M&A, and JVs. Companies continue to look for partnerships. It's a faster way to get to market share than it is to grow it on your own. Hiring with caution, but what they are looking at, sales and marketing, technology in particular, semi-skilled and specialized employment is focused. And this is a draw out of CEO perspectives. And then global growth. I'm going to talk about FDI, foreign direct investment, particularly into the U.S. market, because that's where communities should be focused, or at least applying part of their effort. And then local versus global market penetration. Local regional penetration in markets for your businesses are important, but for long-term sustainability, the opportunity to think globally and have global markets and partners for export and for import is very important. So if you look at this chart, and this terminates at 2011, basically in amount of millions of dollars in global investment, inbound foreign direct investment, you can see very clearly over the last 30 years, the U.S. has outbranched any other competitor. Many people think China, an enormous amount of FDI, but in fact, China is reinvesting in its success. Its business is back into China, but companies are starting to understand the global platform, and they are investing in other places. But by far, they're investing in the United States. And this continues. If you ran this chart out another 2 years, it wouldn't look that different. So what does that tell you? It tells you that companies are coming here and want to invest in a place that's secure, sound, and a good financial investment. This is a busy chart, but it's a fun chart. And by the way, I'm happy to share these with the audience afterward. We can provide them, so I don't think need copious notes. But in this GDP per hour worked USA and manufacturing wage rate matrix, you can see the U.S. sort of sitting way up on productivity between 50 and 60 hours, and the wage rate sitting in there about 27.50. And what's happening here is that people are beginning to recognize, and I know you've heard about advanced manufacturing, I'm going to touch on it. They're realizing that in order to get the value proposition, and we'll see in the next chart in the China example, the opportunity and the balance between wage and overall cost delivery is narrowing. That's a good thing. That's an opportunity for American business, for American production. So if you look at this chart, 2005, 51%, much less cost production of goods in China versus the U.S. in 2013 is 30%, and that's narrowing. That's a very good sign, and that's a very good trend for future business in the United States. Well, let's talk a little bit about economic development and business expansion from an economic development perspective. I spend a fair amount of time working with clients in communities. I spent 30 years at 3M Company. I ran their global real estate the last 15 of that 30 years, retired 6 years ago, sort of like that mafia thing, you know. You're out, and after a year, I'm back in, but on another side. And what I've seen over the years is transcending. And so these building blocks in this first set of bullets are very true today. They were true then, but they're even stronger today. Retaining and expanding your business base is your fundamental first principle. Expand and help them expand the market share that they enjoy today and grow it. That's a fundamental. You've heard that before. You've heard it from Mr. McCall, I'm sure. I didn't hear his comments, but I've heard him speak many times. Ron talked about it. The next building block, essential, is workforce. It's more important today than ever. Competitive workforce will reskill and retraining the workforce. The investment potential and the financial partnerships that you can bring, the U.S. Bank, perfect example, but capital, venture capital, the opportunities to look at both investing in the community's infrastructure as well as the businesses that are there, the businesses you want to attract, helping that happen. It takes capital. In the last 2 years, we've seen capital begin to come available and more affordable, but for the right reasons. And then entrepreneurs and innovation. Ron mentioned it. I'm sure Mr. McCall mentioned it. Every community recognizes part of the strength, the fundamental early strength of American business was the entrepreneur, was the small business with the 3 and the 5 and the 10 jobs. Most of those companies, you look at Silicon Valley, were little tiny startups with an idea in a garage or in a small back office operation that have grown into mega firms. So entrepreneurship and innovation within companies that are large are being emphasized, as well as small companies and startup. And the educational partnerships and platforms, which I'll speak to throughout a number of these charts, are more important now than ever. It's happening everywhere in the world, and it's happening here. So competitively speaking, in China, in France, in the UK, wherever you may go, the true partnerships that are being fostered between the educational platform and the businesses are a core strength and a competitive advantage. So, focused strategic intent, economic development, relationships at the state, regional, and local level. I'm going to talk a lot about regional economic development. The fact that your communities are, 75 plus miles apart? When you think of an economic development donut on a bigger MSA basis, I always look at 120 miles as the really outside perimeter. But if you look 30, 60, 90 miles, you start to see overlap and benefit. So you're in that sweet spot. You also have some crossover with other states and a flex. You're in a good place. You're in a wonderful place for that. Job creation within the state, it's great to attract, but if you go back and model a community like Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in 1990, their biggest problem was exodus, all their talent. They were educating them all, great schools, Mellon, Pitt, University of Pennsylvania. They couldn't keep one of them. They were leaving. Why? Industry wasn't there, new attraction was there. They didn't have the basis. You look at them today, completely reversed story. Good community, probably benchmarked them, but it's another aspect you might consider. Advanced manufacturing is the new mantra. It's an element of looking at technology in a new way. I'm going to talk on a couple of themes to that, but I think advanced manufacturing is a new re-entry for refined direct manufacturing. It's not in the hundreds of thousands of jobs initially, but it's in the tens of thousands of jobs, and that's the beginning to a new site. Educational platforms, industry demand for talent is there, so you have to be able to bring people along faster. Universities are bridging the gap on research and commercialization. Here at UNC Charlotte in the portal, I don't know if you got up to see that, the research sector area. All of those are also reinforcing this entrepreneurial startup engagement proposition. If you haven't looked at Startup New York, you should look at what they're doing there. Now, I'm not promoting New York in any way. I'm born and raised in that area. But they are aggressively pursuing an economic development 10-year tax-free alignment with the university platforms, both in the public and private sector. So New York Startup is a program you should just take a moment to check that out. Developing industry clusters. are very important because these are overlapping balanced elements, and then global exportation and global supply chain. Here's an area I don't know if you've talked much about and seen much about, but e-commerce, I think you know about it. I mean, we all have these things. I mean, the proliferation of this is huge. So if in business and attraction is an opportunity to land or look at one area of development, I chose to bring this forward and talk a little bit about e-commerce. There's mega demand for it. It's all over the world. Companies' ever-growing dependency on technology, no matter what that business is, the floral shop, the little guy in the van selling hot dogs, technology is always there and it will be there going forward. So it's a huge demand. It's helping drive businesses in every aspect, big, small, medium, so forth. And there's a demand for flexibility, low cost, and reliable solutions in looking at technology. Some of the changing trends I wanted to mention were on 3D manufacturing, printing, milling, and automated tools. This is fundamentally changing the way in which businesses think about and where they could be and why they need to be where they are. Advanced robotics, lower cost, flexibility, and portability used to be these big mega. Now in automotive, truly big mega. But in many applications now, these are very mobile. They also are very adaptive to repurposing assets. So when you think about existing, got to be built new and brand new, not necessarily. Repurposing existing assets. And by the way, I have done a little bit of reading. In both of your communities, which have older structures and you've done a really nice job on repurposing a number of those assets. That has a whole other, I can talk about that for about 45 minutes alone. But that is a very important point about adaptiveness to supporting advanced technology. And then the open source of connecting platforms with these tools. I mean, they're dynamic tools and they're only getting better. Also the landscape for 3D printing is, you know, back in the day, my 3M days, 30 years ago, we'd go to communities and we'd look at a community that had 20 to 50,000 people. We would be the big dog in the room. And we thought that was a competitive advantage. That changed by 1990. We were looking minimally at locations at 275 to 500,000 for a lot of the reasons I've already talked about. But in this new platform, I mean, there are businesses that can be right in inner city, working in relatively small component space and do 3D printing very effectively and have a nice business. So it is not a limiting technology. In fact, it could be in multiple platforms unto itself. Let's see. Charts. E-commerce. Data center site selection is a big and growing component. If you hadn't thought about this or it isn't a platform in your communities, it's something to think about. I bring it up wherever I go because I see it transforming its way into a number of communities that you would think otherwise they wouldn't qualify. But it has multiple platforms, co-location, cloud, build-to-suit, standalone applications. And single companies have multiple platform solutions, so they're not all putting everything in one data center anymore. They're actually isolating them. For larger banks, and Bank of America, for instance, has major legacy system challenges because of the acquisition of many banks and bringing them together. That is sort of the mega problem and challenge. But in many businesses, such as the one I work for, 3M, they can have multiple platforms for data and interactive wherever they might reside. They don't necessarily have to go back to the mothership in order to do that going forward. The financial model, these are just some examples, but electric and water are big resources for this industry. New construction or repurposed assets are utilized. New taxes after incentives over 10 to 20 years is really the financial model they look at. So they are going to look for, and the states and the communities that want to allow these businesses, other than co-location because of absolute need, has been on tax incentives on the front end. That has triggered the decision to go. New construction, equipment, labor, and so forth. The development landscape, end users are dictating where they go. It's not the developers and it's not necessarily the communities. They just need to be ready. The companies themselves are really the drivers of it. And they're going to really interesting places. I mean, you have Microsoft going to Wyoming. And they're going to Wyoming for a couple of reasons. Tax environment, tremendous water, relatively manageable climate, low cost of operation, and pretty remote from everything else. And you don't need a lot of people, you just need the right people in the right place. So something to think about. And as you're looking at your communities, bandwidth, dark fiber, redundancy, reliable, cost-effective power. I know in some of your utilities, you rate it very, very well from a cost perspective, very competitive on a U.S. basis. That's a competitive strength. That's something to emphasize and continue to work to provide. Talk a little bit about energy and reshoring. These are another components to think about. Domestic energy production, there's now an abundance of affordable natural gas and energy. Anybody here been to Williston, North Dakota? Ever?
Yes.
Great.
40
Been there
years
recently?
No.
I actually did a project for them, and I thought, well, gee, they need a site selected consultant. I don't know why. And the reason was the ED director, first of all, I've never seen an office that had 250 shovels, and he said, that's just in the last year for groundbreakings. He said, I need help working on this project. We're considering to bring a French fry manufacturing plant, which everyone would die for and kill for, in Williston. The problem is I got Halliburton calling me now, I got these boys over here doing this, and if you want to see the wild, wild west gold rush of the 21st century, go to Williston. 14,000 population in 1985. Today, 35,000. They project in 5 years they'll have 85,000 people in that town. 85. It's a man camp. It has the largest single #1 Ford F-150 dealership in the United States, Williston, North Dakota. But the positive trends of this energy aspect is recapturing industry, U.S.-based companies and reshoring. FDI component. There's a balance in wage, intellectual property protection is fostered and protected in the United States like nowhere else. Quality control is an issue, and advanced manufacturing or advanced technologies is going to demand this. Transportation, the cost of fuel, and the just-in-time elements are key. I'd also mention that as you look at, and there's debate right now with the Section 179D Fed program on refurbishment, upgrade, for LEED and energy. These incentives and these components for all these elements I'm talking about, and for that matter, any of the businesses you may have or want to attract, are very important. Now, it was very cachet, it was very nice and fashionable to have LEED certification and energy working on your behalf, and it was a competitive advantage for one building to another, particularly in the commercial office. But in fact, what's happening now is, and I think it was mentioned, Ron, the question was asked, and the millennium folks and the younger folks, they ask the companies right away, what's your stance on energy efficiency and the environment? It's not how much money I'm going to get, it's not when I'm going to be promoted to the top, it's that. So attracting young entrepreneurial or young individuals into your companies, this is a component of the workforce attraction, more so than just the efficiency it brings in running a particular operation. This is an example out of the reshoring library in Washington on just some noted cases for reshoring documents and the reason they're happening and they're coming back to the U.S. I've met with two companies. One is an Indian company in India, a textile manufacturer, believe it or not. And they want to come back here, not necessarily initially to make clothes, but they need to have a distribution center here for just-in-time immediate delivery because they can't afford not only the cost of fuel in moving them over in containers, but the ability to service their clients in the way they need to going forward. So now they're talking about at least reshoring from the perspective of distribution. I won't dwell on these in individual, but now I'm going to shift. This is one of the things they asked me about. CEO 2014 Best Worst States Top 10. These are the top 10 states from the CEO perspective. And there's a very common theme in every one of these states. Pro-business, low tax, regulatory is pro-business in nature. They've worked very hard over several years, including North Carolina most recently, in making some moves and more competitive with their neighbors on a tax basis. And in every one of these cases, this has been a evolution. Some of these have been there for a while. Texas has been at it for quite some time. But what it also tells me, and we look at this actually, the United States has grown up. Louisville isn't what Louisville was 35 years ago. Charlotte certainly isn't. And there's a ton of places that are like that. Indianapolis. God forbid, Reno. Reno is getting a lot of play. We work with a number of California companies, which are very interesting to work with. In considering relocation, and one of the places that has really resonated with them is Reno, because it's near Tahoe and it's real near Sacramento, and although we're California and we want to keep that sort of California thing, we can do it for a hell of a lot less money over in Reno than we can do it in Sacramento or the Bay Area, and that is driving. Las Vegas is looking to transform itself to be a global mega center of operation, not gambling and entertainment. That's certainly core to them, but they see that as a competitive advantage. They're a very interesting community to look at in the future. You see some of these other communities, and I know you've probably benchmarked some of them. Austin, Houston is the mega player in Texas, no question. Tampa, Orlando, the Southeast Coast, the Miami, Palm Beach and such area is attracting small, medium range headquarters or satellite headquarter offices, quality of life, affordability, taxes. Charleston and Greenville. And you talk about the I-85 corridor, and Charlotte is certainly a huge beneficiary of that. The I-85 corridor that runs that threshold all the way to southeast part of Georgia and into Alabama, I think it takes up 65, I think, from there. But running all the way from Richmond is a dynamic engine, and it will continue to be a dynamic engine. But Charleston is a key player because of the port. It will be one of only 3 ports in the 21st century to handle the big mega ships. That is a competitive advantage, the logistics, supply chain, and so forth. I can talk and I'll answer any questions you may have on any of these, but in every example, they have demonstrated consistency, and they've worked hard to try to differentiate themselves along that basis. So businesses can go anywhere. Let's talk about location factors for a moment. These haven't changed, but the way companies weigh them and how they factor the weights and the sub-factors underneath each of these is very different. Skilled workforce, the quality and availability, if you can't demonstrate it or they can't see it, it doesn't matter. Last time I looked, there isn't anything that is done that doesn't require people. Someday it may get there from robotics and you don't have to show up. But the fact of the matter is you have to have people, and you have to have the right people. As the last chart about those locations, business climate, tax, and regulatory will win the day in the end. If it's a near-term or even short, mid-term kind of application for business, they may have tolerances, but the longer they look at the strategic intent of the business they're going to, taxes and regulatory and proven trended data that demonstrates that is a competitive advantage. If you don't have it, the trended data is kind of up and down and all around, it is not going to serve you as well. Market, they have to have customer proximity, whoever they're servicing. So from that perspective, it speaks for itself, and then of course market growth potential. They have to see that as an internal to an external opportunity. supply chain, industry clusters, whether it's supporting them. So I brought up the IT example for the data centers. Data centers don't require a lot of people to run them, but they do require a lot of support periphery to support them. And so they look at that from an industry cluster and an industry perspective. Energy costs are huge. They're at the forefront of everything that runs. Infrastructure. And I'll talk about Charlotte and infrastructure in a minute. Quality of life, of course. These are not new. None of these are new to you, but how companies look at them and weigh them is very important. Risk is a standalone, but it's also overlaid on every one of these. Risk is so important, and it's one of the hardest things to quantify and qualify. And companies struggle with this, and which element. I mean, you can think about natural disasters, you can think about floods. I think I read about Louisville, 2 floods in 100 and something years. I mean, and they've done things to correct that. So that risk is mitigated. You can be downtown, you don't have to be up on the bluff, and you're good to go. But it is in that respect. And because we're still in business at H&A, you have to have public incentives of some sort. They predominantly come from the state, so your partnership and the state level is where the big dollars usually are. But I will tell you, in public incentives, there are 2 fronts. There's the statutory and there's the discretionary, and then there is the creative. Part of what we do at H&A is work with communities to look at and understand how they might be creative with incentives to win a particular business. If we're in your community with and meeting, having the state, county, regional, and local, you're on the short list. If I'm sitting in the room with them, with you, the game is on, and you're competing with 2 or 3 different locations, and that's exciting. But that is important, and that will, in many cases, differentiate ultimately where those companies go. Trended data, as I mentioned, and why Charlotte. I think you heard this, but it's so true. 20-plus years in this community is a track record of quality and sustainability for growth. Companies love that. That's risk averse. They can trend it out, they can see it, they see the investment, they see the engagement. It's a competitive importance of the private-public partnerships is huge. They speak well, they work well, they represent. Uniformed representation is an enormous advantage. In Charlotte, regional economic development partnerships, and there was a comment about South Carolina, North Carolina, crossover of some of the counties in South Carolina. Hey, why not? They're probably going to come work here. They may live there, but that is a competitive advantage. Embrace it. Don't discard it. County, city, and private sector leadership. You had Mr. McCall here. I needn't say any more about that. The question I have for Charlotte is, who are the new leaders that are going to carry the mantle going forward? I have the same question for any community we're in. Who are those individuals? Because you need them. They have to stand up for something. They have to put forward the vision and support it. Investment, but execution. If you talk about doing intermodal, and it was a fight 20 years ago, you've done it. That's a big difference between we're thinking we're going to do this, we really want to do this, and you haven't. Trended data, representation, and educational partnerships and platforms, CCCP, University of North Carolina, any number of the schools here. I know with your communities, you have some phenomenal, University of Kentucky, Louisville. Oh, by the way, on diversity, I have to mention Louisville because, you know, you guys obviously embrace that. You have Patino there. He's a New York guy. He is 1 year younger than me. 11 months. I think it was September of 1952, and I was 11 months earlier. But I thought that was great, you know. And he hasn't lost his accent. You guys got to work on that, though. Pro-business environment, certainly tax and regulatory, and the infrastructure that's there has really served Charlotte extremely well. You've seen representation of that. And you heard about diversity, but I'm here to tell you, on the global platform, Recognized internally and internationally, there's visibility to Charlotte. More so than a lot of other communities of its size and its MSA anywhere in the United States. It's amazing. But in part the reason for that is the German contingent that's here and in the region. Metallurgic, precision tooling, subcontracting, the diversity in that blend in itself. It has good proximity also to Europe. It's easy to get to and from. It's got great distribution, and the airport is tremendous. So it really supports all of those things working together. Certainly the second largest U.S. financial center is a huge advantage. But manufacturing, logistics, healthcare, this is a dynamic healthcare region as well, are very competitive. Has a very diverse and ranged workforce now and a talent pool for many other companies. And I'll illustrate in a second. And the MSA demographics work really well. It's not huge, it's not Atlanta, and it's not small. It's kind of in the sweet spot. And so with that dynamic, it works well. Quality of life, affordable, medical centers of excellence, recreational options. I mean, it's really blessed. It's got the mountains, it's got the Piedmont, and it's got the ocean. And it's a very diverse state geographically, and that works very well for Charlotte and the region in general. Cultural options, what you see and have heard already has been built here in the last 10 years or less. It's amazing. The museums, the emphasis, the ability for people, and this you may know and this you may think about, but it's also something to really register. When companies bring talent, and you can say on an industrial manufacturing basis, 17%, 16% of that workforce is highly educated. They come with advanced degrees, engineering, and so forth. But what they also bring is a spouse who typically has the same level of degree or close to it. And guess what? Those people are learners. They're people who stretch and look outside. They're 24/7 and learning and experience wherever they go. And on that basis, it isn't just that one individual who has that job. It's that who's going to look for meaningful employment and an environment that's learning, culturally rich, and diverse. That's a strength. And that's a competitive advantage from Weatherford, Oklahoma. And we learned it at 3M the hard way, to Minneapolis, for instance. Big challenge. And the climate, which you've enjoyed the last 3 days. It's been very interesting. So, I'm going to end with this and share this with you. I think that's if you hadn't seen this, IBM's report on the world's most competitive cities, top 100, produced in fall of 2000 through Site Selection magazine. You can go online and pull this report. It's really worth reading if you haven't seen it. But on the basis of competitiveness as they looked at it, and this was their site selection group, their global site selection group, 5 different types of investment properties by business sector and business function. Charlotte is in the 28 to 32% on average level, competing against huge, London, Paris, New York, San Francisco, Chicago, Shanghai. You go down the list and look where Charlotte is. In international HQ, ranked 35th on this quadrant. Corporate management, HR, finance, marketing, all those skill sets are here, and it's validated through this study. Shared services, software development, financial services, life science, R&D, and production. It's a really wonderful testament to the work that's been done, and you've heard a great deal, I'm sure, in the last 2.5, 3 days representing this community. But this is trended data. This is representation data that supports a place like Charlotte is a place to be in the future. Been very kind. Hopefully I haven't overextended my time. I'd like to thank you. I'm happy to field any questions. Thank you very much.
Mr. Beattie, thank you so much for your presentation. In 2010, Washington Post published a very extensive economic forecast. And if you go onto their website and look at it, it drills down a lot. And they showed that if the economy were to get back pre-2008, we'd need to have a 6% growth to get there by 2015. This is 2014. If we didn't do it then, a 3% growth would get us there in 2020 or 2022. We haven't busted the 2% ceiling yet. What do you see, what do you think may happen as the lines continue to diverge rather than converge?
Unfortunately, I'm supposed to be this inspirational guy, go out and do it, this is all great. You know, the reality of the situation is today is a lot different than then, and it's probably a slower uptake than the earlier predictions about crossovers. Unemployment at 4% or less nationally. Will we get there? It's really hard to say. There are a lot of folks who would say no, and there's reasons. I mean, there's some reasons there are people who have given up. They're not even being captured right now on an unemployment perspective. But the fact of the matter, I think, in time, with some of the bulleted elements such as advanced manufacturing, some elements of reshoring and recapturing, continued FDI investment in the billions of dollars annually in the United States, we still present and have, by far, by any measure, the most dynamic, most prolific, stabilized economic platform in the world. Now, natural resources, one of the big challenges, and I'm kind of branching out, but I think it's important. As we've grown, there are some demands on resource that are woefully underestimated, and one of them is water. I mean, you know, everyone talks about petroleum, fuel, and gas and oil. They are certainly core engines, but if you don't have water, we're out of here. It's over. And in parts of this country, you've seen extensive drought, extensive challenges. That has an impact not only in the agricultural business, but in any number of businesses going forward. So it's going to be, in my humble estimation, and those that I speak to and the businesses I talk to, a slower uptake, a slower climb back to whatever that right measurement is. But thinking in terms of 2006, 2007, will we be there in next year in the 7-year window that was the earlier projection? Maybe not. Yes.
As you look at sites and look at site selection factors, one area that I did not hear, and I'm curious because I hear some conversation about it, is right to work. Would you make a comment on, is it important or not?
Yeah, well, it's embedded in the regulatory aspect under tax and regulatory, but it's a great comment. It's incredibly important. Every one of those states you saw on that chart was right-to-work states. So that's just one example, but it's a component that is critical. Now, I will tell you, and this is from my personal experience in my 3M days, you can have a right-to-work place and in an industrial park with several really significant companies, and one rather small privatized company, poorly managed, that will, through that poor management, have a union show up tomorrow. And it's a foothold and a disruption to an otherwise positive environment. So right to work is a competitive advantage. It's one to be protected. And those states have succeeded, some more recently, Indiana and others. So does that answer your question?
It does, but I'd like to be a little bit more direct. Is it one of the first checklists when you start to look at a site, one of the top 3?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Is it one of the first top, one of the top 3?
In the regulatory aspect?
Yes.
It is. It's in there. It's in probably the top 5 of aspects. Certainly cost, overall cost in running. But a competitive advantage, companies do look very closely in the top 5 of regulatory to right to work and the ability to have a long-term sustainable workforce that's within that structure. I guess my time has run out, so I got to get out of here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. A warm Kentucky thank you. Our breakfast of champions.
This is a very diabolical gift because my name is etched on this. And although Feltner is a German name and that's that side, Beattie is a Scots-Irish name. And we have a thing we say, just one more boil. Thank you very much.